Good evening. Today we are learning Maseches, Nedarim, Daf Sameches, starting at the very top line. For those of you who recall our learning from Shabbos, we began a new parak of Na'ara HaMe'urasa. And in that Mishnah, we had learned a din that a Na'ara HaMe'urasa, who is a young girl who is engaged, betrothed, she's between 12 and 12 and a half years old. So the Mishnah had stated a din that in order for there to be hafaras nedareha, in order to undo a neder that she makes, she needs both her father and her fiance to be a part of the annulment process. We saw yesterday a whole complex mahalach of Rabbah, and today we're going to see a very simple approach of Tana de Rabbi Shmuel, and that's on the very top of Sameches Amid Beis, proving the same idea that the annulment must have both people, father and groom, otherwise it does not work. Starting at the top of the page, the Rabbi Shmuel Tana, they taught as follows: Bein ish leishto bein av levito. And here says the Gemara, Mikan lenara murasa shaviu ba'ala mefir nedoreh. Same din, just a different marimakom, and way less complicated than yesterday. Says the Gemara, L'tana de Rabbi Shmuel, what does he do with the pasuk of Im hayosi yele ish my avidle? The pasuk that we used yesterday, that Rabbah used to prove his point, that a father and a groom are the only ones who can annul and they must be done together. Well, if Tana de Rabbi Shmuel is not using that pasuk, so then what do they use it for? Because only Rabbah used it, not him. So says the Gemara, and this answer is only going to be a structural answer, not a detailed answer. Mukim li'idach de Rava. It's going to be really like a different sheet of Rava. This actually should be Rabbah, and we're not even going to learn what that is now. The Gemara leaves it in code, and we'll see this over the coming blot. The Rabbah, Hai Tana de Rabbi Shmuel, my avile. What does Rabbah do with the pasuk of bein ish leishto bein av levito that Tana de Rabbi Shmuel was using in order to teach this din that? In order to teach this din that Aviha ubayla mefir nedareh, says the Gemara, a third of the way down on Sameches Amud Aleph, miboyle lomar shehabal mefir nedarim shebeino lebeino. A quirk. The Gemara says, what if there is a neder that was made by the Kala when she's a Na'ara Me'urasa, but the neder in its essence is something between the groom and the bride? In this engaged stat, there the Gemara says akula. So that's what Rava would use the pasuk of bein ish leishto bein av levito. He uses that pasuk to say that if the nedarim that are being made are beino leveino, between the husband and between the fiancés of the fiancé, him and her, then that is something that the Baal can be mefer without the father at all. Okay, we are going to ask one question. We're going to learn a super complicated brisa. It's not complicated on its face, but when you see how much Ron there is on this page and on the next page, you can just infer by simple scanning of the page that this is quite difficult. It doesn't read difficult, which is good for a Daf Yomi shiur, but really it requires many days to chisel this out. So let's ask the question. The question is not so difficult. A beautiful Lumdisher question. We said that we needed the father and we needed the groom to do hafaras nedareha together. What are the mechanics? Do we say that each person holds 50% of the neder? Or do we say that really all that's happening here when one person is not involved is that we're just weakening the neder? So is it 50-50, or is it a weakening of the whole neder itself? And here's how the Gemara phrases this. Ibayalahu, a question was raised in the Beis Medrash. A Baal, let's say that a husband, the fiance, when he is mefer his part of the neder, do we say megas gayis? We cut in half, meaning 50%. I, the Baal, have 50% responsibility for hafara. You, the father, have 50% hafara for the neder. And it's megas, guys, we cut it down the middle, 50-yard line, we slice it. And that which is my chelek, there's no longer an isser, I was mefer. But on the other side, would it still be usser if the father didn't say anything? Oh, or do we have a different mechanics at play here? Oh, is it miklash kalish? Or do we say it used to be that this neder was on the status of a lav sheyesh bo malkos, and now that we have someone who's doing hafara, it lowers it down to a regular lav, but not 50-50. So those are the two options, 50-50 or miklash kalish. 50-50 is splitting. Yes, usser, no usser. Miklash kalish is it used to be an isser lav, and now it is not. Now it used to be an isser lav with malkos, now it's a regular isser lav.
Isn't it like a safety deposit box where you need both keys for it to work?
It's a great question, and one that the Rishonim will have to deal with extensively, but the Gemara is quite simplistic about its approach here. Let's take a look at the Gemara's explanation of the question, and see, that was my first instinct when I read it, is that this is a steer to the Mishnah. It's the first thing that I thought of is that, what do you mean? Nothing happens until both do something. And that's not true what we're saying from the Gemara. It is incremental, but we don't know how the increments work. That's really what's happening. The Gemara, the question you're asking is the Gemara's question. But the Gemara parses out the question still more. Halfway down. In what scenario would this question be asked? So Kevan de Nadra mitrain Zaysin. Let's say she makes a neder not to eat 2 olives. V'shama arus v'hefer la. And her husband, fiance, he hears that she made a neder, and on the spot he said, I hereby undo your neder. But she didn't listen. The achal tanun, she eats it. I amri megas gayis, if we want to say that when one of the two parties does his part, 50-50, one of the olives no longer has the status of a neder because he was hefer, but the other one certainly does. And then lakie, she should get malkos because granted, the one that the husband was mefer on, there's no malchus, but she ate both. And the other one, the father, wasn't mefer yet. So now she's chayav malchus for violating the isra of violating her neder. Or iamrinan miklash kalish, or if you want to say that when one of the people makes his hafara, it reduces the status of that isra neder from a lav sheyesh bol malchus to a lav she'ein bol malchus. Then says the Gemara, if that's true, then isura ba'almahu. That would just be a regular isra that she violated, and there would be no malchus. So simplistically, the nafkamina between these two approaches would be malchus, but the mechanics of each one are very, very different. The mechanics of approach number one in Megas Gaiz is that they're 50-50, there's 2 zaysim. The Baal over here says, this olive is the one that I'm being mefer, conceptually. And therefore, if she eats the other olive, she's going to be chayiv malchus. Masha'enkin, according to the approach of Miklash Kalish, is that, no, it's not 50-50. But whenever one person does hafara, it instantly reduces the stratosphere level, totally different isser now. You were up there with malchus, we're not dealing with malchus anymore. That is the Gemara's chakira. The Gemara says, let's answer this question, 5 lines from the bottom. Tashma, we're going to bring a brisa. To be clear, a couple of preparatory remarks. This brisa is not on our Mishnah, it's on a future Mishnah. We're going to dig into this brisa again in the future. To be clear as well, there are 5 parts of this brisa. They are the splitting of hairs. The cases are very, very similar. And I'll only point out 1 or 2 scenarios just to create some minor chakiras that are more clear for us. And the last of these cases is the one that we need to answer the question of whether or not one of the 2 people doing hafara is megas gayis or miklash kalish. That's what we're going to do right now, and then the daf will be over. It's not long, and it's not hard to read, so it's not going to be a long shiur, but just recognize when we turn the page, there's a lot of Ran, like a lot. Okay, here we go. What does the brisa say? 5 lines from the bottom. Emasai amru meis habal nisrokna rishus la'av. What is the case scenario where when the fiance dies, then nisrokna rishus labal, then the responsibilities that were on the husband are emptied and now given over back to the father? In other words, she makes a neder, and at some timeline, he then dies. We don't know yet what he knew about the neder or not, if he did hafara or not. We'll see these differences in the brisa.
But isn't the fiance is not a husband? So the husband.
That's the whole discussion, is that it's nara meurasa. You're right. On the one hand, she's not fully married, so she's part of Beis Aviha.
Right.
But at the same time, she's engaged. She's kind of part of the Beis Baal, even though she's not fully married yet. That's this whole discussion. Correct. That's exactly right. So in this case, when she is in this little twilight zone of half is not right. She's partially connected to her father. She's partially connected to the Baal. So what do we say when the Baal dies at some point? We don't know the details yet. What would be the case scenario when a neder was made by the woman, the Baal dies, and then the father takes over to fully annul a vow? Says the Gemara, Emasai, when is that true? 4 lines from the bottom. Bisman shelo shama habal kodem shiamus. So here's the timeline. She made a neder. He instantly dies. Then the father can take over. Makes sense. Oh, another possibility is sheshama v'shasak, or the father, the Baal heard and was silent. Oh, sheshama v'hefer, or he actually heard and did say something, but umeis bo bayom. In all of these cases, when he dies on that day, even though he did hafara, we assume his capacity to do hafara and even his silence on that day are zeros. And therefore, the entire capacity to do hafara is now fully back on the father, which is very unique. Because this case pointed out that he actually was mefer, but because he died bo bayom, we assume that there was a chisaron in his hafara, because we don't know what his das was. We don't know. Certainly the case scenario of his silence, right? That Silence, okay? So here, yeah.
No idea his son. Right, you got hit by a bus, I mean, he's not like, sitting
Yeah.
there,
Yeah, told you it's a tough price. There is a change in gears here, but not one that will solve your question. That really is what's going on here, and you can look at the Ran on the bottom here. So we can actually look at the Ran together if you want. The last Ran, 5 lines before the bottom. Katani umesbo bayom shama v'shasak koi. This is already a touch on what you're saying, Stan. That when it says meis bo bayom, that's only talking about when he heard and was silent. The dafka bo bayom da'akati lo kai mebal yochol ha'av lahafer. Aval meis miyom shalach. It's really not your sugya. It's really not. Okay, we're going to leave this for another day because where this brisa will come up again. Fair question. But that's our case when the Baal dies and the husband can totally take over. Turning to the top. Did I read all those words? What? The Baal dies, then the father can take over. Yeah, sorry if I said the wrong thing there. Let's go. Top of Maseches Samid Beis. You should be scared.
Learning the Ran, are you scared? We're not learning the Ran.
The truth is, learning the Ran is a beautiful rishon to learn. He's wordy but super clear. The problem, it's not like the Balei HaTosfos that are sometimes they're so terse and they assume you know so much information, which we never do. When I was in Kolal, one of the rabbeim that we shared a base medrash with, he said that his brother knew every single Tosfos and Nashim and Ezekiel by heart.
He's writing for it. Well, now.
I think he's just sitting in the mirror. He's been sitting in the mirror and learning for like 45 years or something like that. You don't want that person to let him do his thing. He doesn't want to write for Art Scroll. I mean, I love Art Scroll, don't get me wrong. Partners with the OU, etc. Fine, but just saying. Yeah.
Is his name young?
I don't know. Could be. Where is Binyamin? I miss him. Aval. However, im shama v'kayam. If the husband heard and he was mekayim, shama v'shasak, those last 2 cases, and he heard about the neder and didn't say a word, and then died a different day, umeis biyom shala'acharav ein yochol lahaper. Then she's stuck with the neder. Then the father's not allowed to change that neder. Super technical, right? Good. All of that is case number 1 of 5. Here's case 2 of 5. Shama avia v'hafer la. Let's say the father heard about the neder and was mayfair. He said, I hereby undo your neder. V'lo hispik Baal lishmoa ad shemei sa'av. But the Baal, the husband, the fiance, did not hear about this before the father died. Zohi sheshaninu. Here we have a Mishnah that reads, Mei sa'av lo nisrukna rishus lebal. It doesn't fall back in the power. So it's like a power of attorney almost. It doesn't fall back in the hands of the Baal to take care of this hafar. Case number 3, which is very.
You still consider Baal, even though they haven't really fully been married?
Baal as it relates to Erison. Yeah. I mean, we're calling him a Baal.
But I'm saying like not instead of maybe the word chassan or something because
it's really, I don't believe we ever use that.
No. Since there's an Erison, she's bound to him.
She is bound to him. Arus is really the appropriate word in the Gemara. It's true. In Rabbi Resnick's shiur, he was using the word arus right and left in this shiur, which is a little bit more of an appropriate term. But in this case, it's clear what's going on here because we know our case so clear from our Mishnah. It's not a Rasa.
There's like
what?
An afkamina la'alacha between a Baal.
There is an afkamina la'alacha between those two. There is, but in this context, we know what's going on. It is like that's these psukim. Yeah, exactly. Michael.
So yeah, I'll be anxious about it anyway.
But the language of Baal versus Arus.
The guy is a fiance.
Correct. He's a fiance.
Right.
But David's point is correct. If she cheats on him, that's cheating. Even though they can't sleep together.
It's fine, right?
No,
They're halachically engaged. He said Harad Mekudesh Li.
It means nothing in our.
In our parlance, it means nothing. They're halachically engaged. They Harad Mekudesh Li, but they didn't have chuppah yet.
I said that before, and I wouldn't be anything.
That's the case of Naramu Rasa that we did discuss that. That's the case. All right, case 3. Last of the short lines, which doesn't say much because there's only 7 lines on the page. 8 lines. Case 3. Shama Baila. The husband heard the hafer. Husband. The Arus heard and did hafara. Below hispika av lishmoa ad shemei sabal. And the father didn't get to hear about it before the Baal died. This is the nafkamina between this case and the first case. Very similar halacha. The only difference between these two, between case 3 and case 1, was whether or not the Av knew before the Baal died. It was only nafkamina between the two cases. Case 4. Shama baila v'haferla. The fiance heard, the arus heard, and he was mefer. Hispik ha'av lishmoa ad shemes. And then the father didn't hear, and then the father died. Ein habal yachol hafer. In that case, which is a little bit more extreme, because the Baal was mefer already, but the father never had the opportunity to chime in. She's stuck. She'ein habal mefer ela b'shutfus. Such a hard Gemara, because that line, what do you mean? We've already seen previous cases. It's not really true, because the previous cases where the Baal died. So one of the themes that we're seeing in the Gemara, and then we'll get into the answer to our question for the day, and then we'll call it a day, short shiur today. One of the themes that we're seeing is that the father has a stronger hand than the arus. Because in the opposite scenario here, the father was allowed to take over the power of attorney to make these decisions. Masha'en came when the Baal is left over. In a very similar case, he doesn't have that. So there really is, they're not equals. There's like a couple of layers of difference between the Av and between the Baal.
But it's the same.
What?
It's the same, because the Av is still upright more than the Baal.
Yes, but I could argue the other way, like David was saying, is that she's halachically married to the point that if she slept with another man, it's Eish Ish.
I understand, but who's finding her?
So the Rishonim would have to say, into your question, is what is the feature that we look at when we choose who ranks higher than who? Do we look at monetary obligations, in which case, for sure, you're right, or do we look at halachic status, in which case she's an Eish Ish? I don't know. I'm just postulating different possibilities, but it's a good point. The last case, and let's just review our question before we start. We started out our discussion today with the Chakira of do we say Megas Gaias, that when one of the two responsible parties does their hafara, that it cuts everything in half, and if she were to then consume all of that food violating her neder, she'd still be chayav malkos? Or do we say miklash kalish, that when one of the two parties of hafara, they are mefer, then it just simply takes it out of that very high level of alav with malkos and moves it to a stam lav? Which one is it? So let's look at the last case and see if we can extract. We have about 5 lines left, and then we'll be done. Shama aviha v'haferla. The father hears about his daughter's neder. She's a nara milrasa v'haferla, and he does hafara. V'lo hispika ba'al lishmoa ad shemes. And the Baal didn't even hear about it before he died, and the Baal died. Chazar ha'av u'mefer chelko shel habal. What do we see? We see that the Av regains power of attorney in this case, and he's able to undo the whole neder. In other words, he's stronger, like we've been saying before, it's stronger than the Baal. Amar Rav Nosson, hein dire Beis Shammai. This last case is the case of Beis Shammai. However, Beis Hillel omrim, ein yochel lahafer. What he says is no. In a case like this, where Shama Avia v'Hafer, this case at the top of Samech Tes Samed Aleph, that case is Machlokes Beis Shammai Beis Hillel. That top case is Beis Shammai, and Beis Hillel says Ein Yochel Lahafer Shmami. No, what do we see? The Beis Shammai Megaz Gayis. We see that according to Beis Shammai, there are portions. Look at the language. Chozer Ha'av u'Mefer Chelko Shel Baal. It's mashma naloshon that way. Masha Ein Kain LeBeis Hillel Miklash Kolish, because he says, what are you talking about? Ein Yochel Lahafer. It's all one thing. It's not two different people. Shmamina. So therefore, we see our machlokes. Of course, we paskin like Beis Hillel. So therefore, the ma'isa, the way we paskin in our Gemara, is that when we have two parties, the Av and the Baal, who are obligated to do hafara together, and one of them does hafara and the other doesn't, granted, she's not exempt, but what it does is it reduces the status of her neder from a lav that does have a punishment of malkos to a stam isser lav that is an isser deraisa but doesn't have malkos. Shama avi avahafirla. The husband is gone, yeah.
Yeah, so then she's stuck because the father can get rid of half of it according to this or lower it.
In this last case, the top line says, that's a huge piece. One of the things that we're focusing on here is the chronology of events. And because the Baal never heard about it, power of attorney can transfer. Had he heard about it, we would have been in totally different straits. That's the nafkamina in the Gemara. But in this case, he never knew at all. Had he heard about it, that's the top line. He never heard about the case.
Never heard about it, so he's gone.
He's gone.
Right, so she's stuck.
No, Oh, yeah, according to Beis Hillel, she's stuck, yeah. Ein yachol lahafer.
How do you understand that? Saying, what's the logic?
If they still holds Niklash college.
No, well, we can mean the.
No.
We can carve out, but it doesn't get rid of it.
Hold on 1 second. The case of Elohispi Kabal Ishmoa Ad Shemes, Machlokes Beis Shammai Beis Hillel. Beis Shammai is of the opinion that Yachol Lahafer, that the Av can be Mefer. Why does he say that?
He takes over the full.
Takes over full. Megas Gaius.
Right.
So the first person didn't have an opportunity to do it because he died. He didn't even know about it. So of course, both parts then fall on him. That makes sense. Beis Hillel says in Yachol Lahafer, and we're saying that his shita is Miklash Kalish. So let's look at the case now. Top line, Shama Avia v'Hafer La. The father hears his daughter's neder and he's mefer. And the husband dies before he ever heard about the neder. So that's a big problem. She's trapped now. But don't worry, even though he's trapped now, Miklash Kalish, the Isser does drop because the father was Hefer.
Yeah, I understand, but she's still over in the bear. She's not over in the pulpit. She's still over in the bear. She does it.
Okay, so 100%. Everyone agrees there's an Isser Deraisa.
But-
Nafkamin is Malkus.
Baal, I understand. So she doesn't have that, but
Correct.
But the Baal wasn't really a Baal. It's gone now. I'm saying she's free from this guy. There's nothing to do with it. Like,
You're asking what's the lumdus of
a
Beis Hillel to say that he doesn't have full power of attorney? I can give you Balabatish Svara is that the husband was alive when the neder was made. And in the state of Nara Me'urasa, his level of knowledge only has a minimal impact. But it was still made while she was. We'll continue tomorrow right at Boy Rava. Wishing you all a beautiful night.
Well, the full married woman, if the husband died and wasn't making it, then she's stuck in.
She's fully married.